It's Wednesday here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter here with Ray Fittipaldo. We're going to talk about this Steelers wide receiver situation, especially now with Davante Adams wanting a trade from the Raiders. Should Omar Khan be in the market? That and a lot more here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo. And as always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as our daily content that comes out from all of our Pittsburgh sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. This show today is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Whether you're injured in a car accident or hurt on the job, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped injury victims for over 40 years recover more than $2 billion on their behalf. If you or a loved one have been seriously injured in an accident, call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, the Steelers would need a lot of money if they went and got Davante Adams because of his contract situation. But let's explore this because we did this for months about Deebo Samuel. But I do think that Davante Adams is a different caliber of not Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk. But I do think he's a different caliber of receiver than where that situation was. Davante Adams, I think, has been in the conversation with being the best receiver in football a couple times. But these circumstances seem a bit different. Brandon Ayuk was in his prime, but, was more like a hovering around the top 10. Davante Adams, he's 32 this year, and his salary cap numbers are set for what the Steelers will have to pay him if they traded for him, compared to they'd be negotiating a new deal if they went and got Brandon Ayuk.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way you have to look at this, Chris, is if the Steelers acquired Davante Adams or any other receiver, they would be responsible for his base salary prorated for the rest of the season. So sometimes people get on over the cap or spot track and they look at the cap hit and all that stuff. But that bonus money has already been paid. The Steelers would actually be requiring the remainder of the contract in terms of base salary. So this year, you could tell me, I know you got the numbers in front of you. I think it's around 16 or 17 million.
Yes, $16.8 million is his base salary right now.
So it's $1 million a week. So basically, if the Steelers acquire him, let's say at the trade deadline or right around there, they would be responsible for probably about half of that, right? $8 million, $9 million or so. If they would do it sooner, then obviously, you do the numbers. It's pretty simple. Let's say they did it this week, they would be responsible for 13 weeks, $13 million. So that's basically how you have to break it down. The Steelers would not pay the back end of that contract, the $35 million in 25 or 26. They would have an agreement in place with the agent on a new contract, or they would tell the agent, hey, listen, we will negotiate a new contract after the season. They've done that many times over the years. They did that with Dante Jackson when they acquired Dante Jackson from the Carolina Panthers. So you would have to think that Davante Adams knew when he signed this deal that getting that $70 million on the final 2 years was probably a long shot, being 33, 34 years old. So, depending on whether he's open to that, depending on the compensation deal with the Raiders, the package the Steelers would have to give them, those are all things that would have to be considered here. But, people were wanting to know about the Steelers receiver situation. Obviously, it's not good enough right now. So I understand guys like Davante Adams coming up in trade talks.
Yeah, and let's be clear. We're going to hear the words rumors and interest about trades around Davante Adams and the Steelers a lot. But it's important to pay attention to how those words are used, because when you look at how the situation is going to play out, Davante Adams wants a trade out of the Raiders. It's been very clear, he hasn't been happy. They haven't gotten him the quarterback play he needs. not an offense that's going to be doing much. He wants to finish his career somewhere, or at least be somewhere where he's going to be able to be used and be able to be on a winning team. And if he wants to compete, the Steelers could be an option there. But I also look at this and I think, Ray, like, Davante Adams is he's 32 this year, he'll be 33 next year. If he has this huge cap hit, the Steelers could want to go get a number 2 wide receiver. But what's the cost in the draft capital that you're going to be giving up to get this guy? It's reportedly the Raiders are looking for a second round and some change. Do you give that up for a guy that you might have for 2 years? And looking at his salary cap hit that you're talking about there, like they'd have to renegotiate that, whatever it is, the 35.6, cap hit it would be next year if they traded for him. They have about $74-ish million next year in cap space, so they would have to work around that. I think there's a lot of things that have to be calculated as far as how to play out before the Steelers enter this. I think this is, and I also think the Steelers would have to be in a similar situation like you and I talked about with Brandon Ayuk, where sure, they were interested in, like, that'd be great if you could add the guy, but they're not going to sell the farm to get him when they have other projects they're working on.
Yeah. So just like just a broad framework for fans. Don't pay attention to Davante Adams' 25 or 26 salary. That does not mean anything.
Yeah.
Just look at this season, what they would have to do to acquire him. So let's say the Steelers don't come to an agreement with Adams and his agent on a new deal, but they still want to do the deal this year and have him be a rental for half the season. Obviously, Chris, you're not going to give up a second-round pick in that scenario. You might give up maybe a fourth-round pick in that scenario to rent him for 8 games, and then you just cut ties with him at the end of the season. You would be on the hook for some dead cap money, but maybe that's something that the Steelers would be willing to do. Maybe not. Maybe that's too onerous for them to take on. I think it's a $12 or $15 million dead cap hit if they would do that. So that's one side of the scenario. The more likely scenario, Chris, is that they do acquire him and they renegotiate a deal. Let's say they get that down to $25 million a year for the last 2 years of his contract. Okay. Then maybe you would have to look at the compensation. Okay. Would the Steelers give up a 2 for him? Would they give up a 3? Would they give up a 3 and a 4? You have to remember the Raiders are asking for a 2. That doesn't mean that they're leaking that information for a reason. They want it out there that that's the.
Didn't the Bears want a first for Justin Fields?
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the starting point in the negotiations. Don't get caught up with what their ask is right now. So I don't know what a fair number would be. Let's say the Steelers acquire him for the remainder of this season for $8 million, and let's say they come to terms with him for $25 million. I'm not even comfortable with that with the guy who's going to be 33, 34. So maybe you get it down to $40 million over those last 2 years. You get Adams for $20 million a season. If you do that, I don't know, maybe you give up a 3 and a 4, something like that. Maybe you just give up a 3 to get a guy like that. I mean, we're just spitballing here right now, but that's basically how it would work from the Steelers' perspective.
Right. And I think another thing to factor in here, Ray, is that part of what made the Brandon Ayuk thing possible was that Brandon Ayuk was being very picky about where he wanted to go. And he was like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. And that's kind of what narrowed it down to the Steelers as a possibility. It was like, hey, maybe that could work there because the Steelers were suitors and they weren't budging, but they were saying like, okay, what do you want to do, Niners? But I think that it's going to be different with Davante Adams. This is a guy who is, top 5 receiver type caliber of a player. Brandon Ayuk more of like hovering around top 10. That's going to make teams want him more. And I think there's going to be other teams that are like in the Super Bowl hunt that they'll be like, you know what? Let's go Los Angeles Rams mode. Let's just go get a Super Bowl this year. Let's go get our guy, add it to him. That's kind of what the Raiders did when they went and got him because they had Derek Carr. They were hoping that, hey, this would work out. And then that didn't work out. But I have to think the market for Davante Adams could change these dynamics entirely. And maybe I'm reading the league wrong. Maybe people are going to jump. Maybe people aren't going to jump all over this, and Omar Khan won't have as many people to contend with to get Adams. But to me, I think this could be a harder situation for the Steelers to go into trades the way they like to and not have to jump up too high.
Yeah, and it depends what's going on with other teams' receiver situations as we near the trade deadline. I mean, look what happened in Kansas City this week. Rashee Rice gets injured. Now, apparently that's not as severe as originally thought. I mean, we're going to have to wait to see what the exact time he'll be out is, but, the Chiefs might be a team that might have some interest there. So you're correct. Anytime there's a bidding war for a guy's services, both in terms of compensation and the contract, then yeah, the Steelers would probably, not benefit from that situation. But, we just have to wait and see what happens with other teams and their receiver situations. Would the Jets be a possibility because of the old connection with Aaron Rodgers? They're hovering around 500 right now. So there's a lot that's going to go into it. But on the surface, I do agree with you that when you have more than one team involved or more than two teams involved, it does get a little bit more complicated for the Steelers and other teams to acquire him for what they want to pay for.
We'll talk about players that are on the Steelers in our next segment here because I know it just feels like too much deja vu that we're talking about. Here's a big name receiver. He doesn't like where he's at. Will the Steelers be in the market? I loathe the possibility that we maybe talk about this for another a month and a half until the trade deadline. No, actually, it's more like a month, because we're already at week 5, so it's only like 4 more weeks. We got to deal with this if this doesn't happen, and we have to wait until it does happen or doesn't happen. So at least it's not as long as the Ayuk situation, which was like from March until he was signed in like September. But we'll get into the quarterback situation because Russell Wilson is getting healthier, and that question is looming larger every single week. We'll talk about that and the Steelers offensive line coming up next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. If you're injured in an accident, but you're probably wondering what's next. That's a question that for over 40 years, Edgar Snyder and Associates have helped injury victims answer. Because whether it's gathering evidence, collecting medical records, or dealing with the insurance companies, all things that can be very tough to do when you're asking that question, Edgar Snyder Associates have helped over 75,000 people handle the what's next question. Call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. The show is also brought to you by SmartSide. Here's a message from our friends at SmartSide.
Between beauty and durability, making your neighbors jealous has never been easier. Introducing LP SmartSide Expert Finish Trim and Siding, now in brushed smooth texture. Available in 16 versatile colors, LP SmartSide Expert Finish products help create timeless designs and beautiful, longer-lasting dream homes. That's the beauty of brushed smooth.
Welcome back to the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter here with Ray Fittipaldo. We're going to stay focused on the Steelers offense here. For all the talk about Davante Adams, there should be talk about who would be throwing him the ball. And maybe it's not so obvious that it is going to be Justin Fields. I think it should be. I think he's played well enough in these early games to maybe hold on to the position. But Ray, as you and Jerry talked about after Mike Tomlin's press conference Tuesday, Mike Tomlin seemed the most optimistic he had been about Russell Wilson's availability. Talking about he's going to do some serious work this week. But he also said they're preparing as if Justin Fields is the starter for the Cowboys game on Sunday night at Acrisure Stadium. And I look at that. And I also look at when he talked about Justin Fields, he seemed the most complimentary that I've seen him be about Justin Fields this week, talking about how he managed the situation of them being down against the Colts. Do you think that anything has actually changed here for the Steelers, or do you think this is still the holding pattern they've been in? Mike Tomlin doesn't deal in hypotheticals. That Justin Fields is the quarterback until he has a bad game.
Yeah, I mean, I just think he bought himself another week, Chris. I mean, the way you look at it is Justin hasn't gone through a full practice yet. Presumably that will happen later today on Wednesday, and then we'll see how it goes Thursday and Friday. If Russell was able to go out there and repeat that and have a clean week in terms of his participation, then I think there's a really good chance that he could be the backup Sunday night against the Cowboys and not the emergency quarterback. So, people want this to be cut and dried. Sometimes there's just steps in the process that, Russ maybe has to check off. And I think this might be one of the one of the steps in that process. Number one, get through a full week of practice. Let's see how that calf is. Number two, let's see how you move around in the pocket. Let's see how you can escape from the pocket. Is your full mobility there? And number three, I mean, don't undersell this, but he's basically had a very interrupted camp / first month of the season with the Steelers, where maybe he was actually full for a week and a half before he had the setback there with the calf. So let's see how you throw with your receivers. Let's see what your command of the offense looks like. To me, that's a lot. It's a lot of boxes to check off in 3 days. I don't know what you think about that. So I think it's more likely he's the backup this week, and then we'll see how Justin plays Sunday night. We'll see how Russell feels next week, and then I think we can legitimately have a conversation about whether there is a full-fledged quarterback controversy or not heading into the Raiders game.
No, I'm right with you that it would make more sense to let Russell, if Russell Wilson's healthy, let him be the backup, and that way you at least know he's ready to go if things go bad for Justin Fields on Sunday. But looking at Justin Fields, this guy is completing 70% of his passes. Granted, they've been very conservative with their attack. He has 830 passing yards, 77 of 109, three touchdowns to one interception. He's also been able to run the ball pretty effectively. I wonder, is there a line that Justin Fields could hit this year, realistically, not saying like, a 6 passing touchdown game, like Ben Roethlisberger at his prime type level of stuff here. But is there a line of like how many games he can be consistently good for that this doesn't become a question anymore, Ray? Because I think this question has hovered above the Steelers for some time now. Yeah. And I'm just not sure if it ever goes away, or if this is just hey, you know what? The Steelers have 2 quarterbacks, and they have 2 guys that they put on, that they have on 1-year deals, that they want to go there. I think back to people say, like, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. I think back to the Denver Broncos when they had old man Peyton Manning, and how they switched between him and Brock Osweiler the year that they won that Super Bowl. Not that that's the ideal quarterback situation you want, but I do think that when you are a defensive-led team, you're kind of figuring out what is your best quarterback situation, that could be a manageable situation. Do you think that's the way that this kind of just continues?
Yeah, you make a good point about Osweiler and Peyton Manning back in 2015. That wasn't the perfect situation, but it didn't matter because their defense was so good. They got home field advantage throughout the playoffs, and Fitzgerald Toussaint fumbled going into the end zone. And the Steelers didn't play for the AFC Championship. The Broncos did that year, but we're going off on a tangent there. My point is, it doesn't have to be like a cut and dried, Russell is your starter, Justin is your starter. It doesn't have to be that way. I honestly, to answer your question, I don't think there is a certain number of weeks where Justin has to be really good. I think we're at the point now where it could be game by game. Let's just throw out a scenario. Let's say Russ is the backup this week. The Steelers lose by 10 points. Let's say it's 20-10, and Justin throws 2 interceptions, doesn't have a good game. Okay. Russell Wilson probably goes in for Las Vegas. Let's see how Russell does. If Russell struggles a month, going into November, then you go back to Justin Fields. And I just think we're at the point now, even though Mike hasn't said it, but I think we're at the point now where we don't have to differentiate between starter and backup. I know people want to hear that. They want to hear Mike say that, but I do think we're at the point now where the Steelers have 2 good quarterbacks. We don't know really what Russell can do. Let's find out what he can do when Justin struggles, and I think we'll just go week to week from there. That's probably the way that it's going to play out.
I could see it playing out that way. And look, again, the reason Mike Tomlin hasn't been open about what's been going, who's where in this quarterback situation, is because I think he wants to be open-ended, and give himself room to wiggle against, with this quarterback situation. Look how things played out last year. Kenny Pickett swore he was the starting quarterback all season long, and that was different. He started off QB1, and there wasn't supposed to be that question, and then he wasn't at the end of the year. And Mason Rudolph held on to the job, and the obvious issues that came along with that, and now all those quarterbacks are gone. I think Mike Tomlin's being very delicate about the situation, and I think it's the smart way to handle it. Real quick here, Ray, looking at this week against the Cowboys, they have a lot of injuries, up front, right now with Parsons, and I think Lawrence, their defensive line missing several guys. But we said that last week about the Colts. Granted, these are like more star players that you're talking about with the Cowboys, but this Cowboys defense is giving up 26 points a game right now. They haven't been nearly as sharp as I think a lot of people expected them to be. Could this be a kind of a get back on it week for the Steelers team? They got things going late last week, but could this be the week where they showed last week was the bump in the road? Maybe the offense looks a lot more fluid this week.
Yeah, I mean, I should probably look this up at some point this week, but I mean, the Cowboys missing Micah Parsons is probably like the Steelers missing a guy like TJ Watt. I mean, he's probably that important to their defense. I don't know what their record is with him out of the lineup, but I wouldn't imagine it's very good. And yes, you point out they have struggled a bit, stopping people. Even they beat the Giants, I think 20-15 last week. They held the Giants to all field goals, but the Giants moved the ball pretty well against them. So, we'll see how it goes. I don't expect the Steelers to go out there and say, okay, we're going to open it up because the Cowboys are injured. No, I think the Steelers are going to play to their personality. I think they'll work within that framework. And then if they end up scoring 27, 30 points in this game, then that probably means Justin had a really good game. But I don't think we're going to see the handcuffs taken off Arthur Smith and Justin Fields just yet. That second half was really nice, but you also saw a couple of mistakes when they were trying to mount that comeback. And I think ideally, in Mike Tomlin's mind, you run the ball, you play good defense, and you ask Justin Fields to make a few plays like he did the first 3 weeks of the season. Last week was nice. They were in catch-up mode, but I don't think that's the way the Steelers want to play all the time if they can avoid it.
No, I agree with you. Also, DeMarcus Lawrence, not Dexter Lawrence, but that was my fault there. But I agree. This is a situation you want to play from ahead. But hey, maybe, and you and I talked about this after the game. Maybe get to get in that situation. Maybe getting to let Justin Fields open it up a couple different ways early on that allows the offense to kind of put the Cowboys defense on their heels. Because look, the Cowboys, like everyone else, everyone's looking at the Steelers. They're saying, hey, don't let them run the ball. That's what they want to do. Don't let Najee Harris get going. Don't let Cordero Patterson, if he plays, or Jalen Warren, if he plays, get going and let this team get downhill, because then that's the pace they want to play at. So it'll be interesting to see how the Steelers adjust to how things went last week against the Colts and see how things go differently against the Cowboys this week. But we also got to talk about the guys protecting Justin Fields, that offensive line, all the injuries that are on it, and who might be returning, who might be starting, all that next year on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, we'll remind you this show is brought to you by Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. They are mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them now for a free consultation. That's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can get your new Honda at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, PA, or go to their website, moonhonda.com. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
To build the Honda CR-V Hybrid, we took everything you love about the CR-V and kicked it up a notch with greater power for a CR-V unlike any before. Adventure confidently with Honda, Car and Driver's most awarded brand in 10 Best history. The CR-V and CR-V Hybrid, part of the Honda line of rugged vehicles. Visit your local Honda dealer where new vehicles are arriving daily. Buy online or reserve from select Honda dealers.
Back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's go to the Steelers offensive line. And whereas the Steelers kind of know, hey, Russell Wilson, if he's back healthy, he's here, and Justin Fields is the starter, there are a lot more questions going on with this Steelers offensive line heading into week 5. We know that James Daniels is now out for the year with his injury, and that it may that whereas that is a very rough situation, because I thought he was playing pretty well for the Steelers this year. Troy Fautanu was already out for most of the season, if not all of the season. The one, I guess, silver lining is that you may get Isaac Seumalo back this week, and Mike Tomlin seemed very confident about the potential of that. I guess it could not come at a better time, I guess, or at a worse time, depending on how you look at it. Glass half empty, half full there. But looking at this situation, the situation might be Dan Moore at left tackle, Isaac Seumalo back at left guard, Zach Frazier still at center, but maybe Mason McCormick moves to right guard there. Maybe he battles it out with Spencer Anderson there, and then Broderick Jones still at right tackle. What's your assessment of the kind of the flipping of losing James Daniels, but potentially getting back Isaac Seumalo for this offense?
Yeah, I mean, so that's pretty much a clean trade-off. I mean, ideally, both of those guys would have been healthy for 17 games, but it doesn't always work out that way. So I think it's great news that the Steelers are getting Seumalo back. I think, in the end, Chris, you could sort of look at what's going on now and just say, we're getting an early look at Mason McCormick. They drafted him in the 4th round to be James Daniels' replacement. We're just seeing that happen well in advance that they anticipated that happening. So, Mason has a shot earlier than probably what they anticipated. But I think if he takes advantage of it, this could turn out to be okay for the Steelers. I'm not going to sit here and tell you they're going to turn into the best offensive line in the league, but I think they could be okay with Mason at right guard. And I do think that's the way it's going to happen, Chris. You go back to training camp until maybe a week or two was left up in Latrobe. Mason had only repped at right guard. It wasn't until later that he started taking reps on the left side. So he's a natural right guard. That's where he played in college. So I think this will be a pretty seamless transition for him this week going in there for James.
I think so too. I think this is kind of putting him in there. And look, like you've said, and we've talked about, Isaac Seumalo is supposed to be like the leader of this offensive line. I think it's unfortunate that you can't have him and Daniels because they're kind of the perfect in betweens. All the younger guys, between Frazier and Jones, and ideally it would have been Fautanu, but it's Dan Moore over there, and he's not a rookie or a second year player, but he's still not a signed veteran on a very good deal for the Steelers offensive line. But he's going to have to be a resource, and I do think he's a better resource on the offensive line than James Daniels. The question will be, can that help balance things? That you're going to have a very young right side of the Steelers offensive line, whether it is McCormick or Anderson. I think it will be McCormick, or not. Yeah, well, I think it will be McCormick on the right side. But that's Frazier, McCormick, and Broderick Jones, 2 rookies and a second-year player whose whole thing was he was very raw coming out of college. That is a thing that I think the Steelers could, it's the thing that could gel. It could become a really good thing. They could become a power trio on that right side and develop some early chemistry. But Ray, you've covered this team for some time. You've seen how things like that take time to develop. And I think you saw that last week when you have Zach Frazier snapping the ball and Mason McCormick tapping him, and everyone's confused about who should have been where at certain times. And, the Colts can confuse the Steelers offensive line with run blitzes. There's going to be growing pains with this offensive line in these early weeks together. And I think there's excitement to see these young guys, but the acknowledgement that it's going to take time for them to grow.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, they don't have a choice. I mean, it's sink or swim for guys like Mason McCormick now. I mean, Zach Frazier, I think, has been really good. Now the onus is on him to be even better. So, I know they went out and got Max Sharping yesterday. They got Max Sharping to be a backup for depth. They're not going to make any more moves. They've invested heavily in this offensive line the last couple of years. Mike Tomlin made reference to that on Tuesday at his news conference. And now it's time for the young guys to show up. And, I should point out that they're not really that young. All these guys were seniors in college. Mason's a 6-year guy. He's 24 years old. So, a lot of times people want to put labels on rookies. Listen, Mason McCormick is a full-grown man. If he's ready for this opportunity, he could run with it. Let's see what happens. Let's give him a shot and see if he can, pick up the slack for James Daniels.
Yeah, I think there's there's growing pains with him. There were times last week where look, Mason McCormick, when he gets going, he's a physical mauler. He's a big dude. He can be really strong. But to do that while also being in an NFL offense, you also have to be coordinated. You have to know where things are coming. You have to know how teams are trying to counter you, where certain gaps, how defenses are defending certain gaps, and how you get to the second level when you need to chip. All those things take time to kind of develop. I always tell people, you go back to Marquise Pouncey and David DeCastro, phenomenal all-pro offensive lineman for the Steelers. But if you go back to, I think it was the season opener for 2013 when David DeCastro and Marquise Pouncey were in a goal line situation, and DeCastro accidentally cut Marquise Pouncey's knee with a bad block, and it took Pouncey out for the whole season that year. Not that that's something the Steelers have to worry about being with this crew, but like offensive line, it requires synergy. It requires everyone being on the same pace at the same time. And it's easier for veterans to get to that level. Young guys, they're still figuring out how they play. They're still figuring out how the NFL plays. And while they're doing that, they're also trying to figure out, hey, when I sit with my right foot this way, is that the same time as this guy to my left or this guy to my right? That's something that takes time. And I have a lot of respect for offensive linemen who are getting to that level.
Yeah, and listen, you're right. It's going to take time. I think Pat Meyer and Arthur Smith really have to be heavily involved too now. They have to make this transition now. They have to make it easy on these guys, right? You don't want to complicate. You don't want them swimming in their own thoughts. I think they got to get back to basics and just let those guys play, let those guys be free and go out there and play football. Those guys are good football players. They just have to go out there and do it now. So, tough situation for the Steelers. I will point out, though, and I'm not saying this team's like 2008 or anything like that, but if I would sit here and name you the names of the guys who were on that Super Bowl line, you wouldn't think it was, Darnell Stapleton, right?
Yeah.
He was maybe in the league for 3 years.
Sean Mahan, am I right there?
No, he came 2000. He was gone by 2008.
Okay.
They had Justin Hardings was their center. Remember, Justin Hardings got called for holding in the end zone. Got that safety late in the game. He was an okay player, not a great player. But my point is, that line, they won a Super Bowl with a below-average offensive line. If they are good in other areas of this football team, they can overcome having a young offensive line. I'm not even saying this is going to be a below-average offensive line. I don't think it has to be. If Pat and Arthur put these guys in good situations, I think they could be just fine. But to your point, it's going to be an issue. It's going to be something to watch here in the next couple of weeks as these guys get comfortable, being new starters.
And we'll see how that progresses this week at Steelers practice, where Ray will be there today. I'll be there tomorrow with Ray, Brian, and Jerry. We got a lot of things to talk about as the Steelers head for a big name matchup with the Dallas Cowboys, a classic rivalry in the NFL between two of the biggest brands for the entire league there. Stay tuned for all the updates all week long here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and on the North Shore Drive podcast. Ray, thank you for joining us. And thank you all for joining us here in the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Read all of our work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com. Find us here on the North Shore Drive podcast every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all those episodes and all of the daily content that comes out from all of our Pittsburgh sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Back Friday here with more on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.